You know I'm right. Nick Durst here with Joe Calabrese. And Joe, we have a guest on today who has won many, many broadcasting awards.
Yes, very esteemed guest. We have another trailblazer in the world of female sports. She's a former professional tennis player, eventually reaching number 33 in the world and playing in multiple major tournaments before knee injuries forced her into an early retirement. Without giving too much more away, she's been a correspondent for HBO's Real Sports with Brian Gubble since 1997. She's worked as an on-air analyst, broadcaster, and reporter for NBC Sports, most well known for her coverage of several Olympic events. And her experience makes her an important historical figure, I think, when we reflect on the emergence of women in sports and the strides they've made in the past few decades. Really, really excited to have her on. Boatload of personality. This is going to be a lot of fun. Miss Mary Carillo. Mary, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us tonight.
Pleasure to be here, Joe and Nick. And I got to tell you, when I'm elderly, clearly, and I've been around a long time. So when people talk about all the networks I've worked for, it just makes it sound like I can't hold a job, you know? I no longer find it flattering in my dotage.
That's the industry now where, you got to bounce around. Network broadcast rights, they play a lot into this. But we're excited to have you here, a 2018 inductee into the Sports Broadcasting Hall of Fame, and you received 2 Peabody Awards, which to me is one of the highest television honors. One for your work with the Billie Jean King documentary for HBO, and also for co-writing with Frank Gifford, the HBO documentary Dare to Compete, the struggle of women in sport. So tremendous work there. And I guess we'll just start with those. When you get to the point where you're getting all these awards, if you kind of look back and say, wow, I'm so glad of what I accomplished, or do you kind of get like a little nervous, or do you kind of say, oh, well, you know what, I accomplished this much, but there's still so much more I want to do?
Well, no, Nick, the great thing about the Peabody Awards is they tell you in advance that you've won. So you get to go to lunch like relaxed, and,
awesome.
And you get to have a cocktail. That is my favorite award because you kind of know what's happening, and it's a prestigious thing. And any big award I've won has come out of HBO Sports. I mean, I started there in 1996 covering Wimbledon for the first time, and it was at the behest. Billie Jean King told the man in charge at the time, you got to get her on. Billie had been working with Arthur Ashe for years, and Martina Navratilova, a bunch of really terrific, Frank DeFord, who I ended up writing that documentary with, and Ross Greenberg. Billie Jean kept saying, you got to get her on. And Billie and Martina and me, we were the first ever all-female announcing team in a tennis booth. So that was kind of cool. But HBO has been very good to me, and I'm very proud to be a long-standing correspondent for Real Sports with Brian Gumble. I really like that show.
Yeah, and of course, you won a sports Emmy as well for Real Sports for your work with the Hoyt family, which was an amazing piece. Now, something that we learned when doing some research on you, let us know if this is true or false.
This isn't going to be good, is it?
We were happily surprised to see that you might be a very distant cousin of sports radio host legend Mike Francesa. Is that true?
That is the story. And I did not know that until the first time I met Mike. And he said, our grandmothers were sisters. What? I didn't know that, and it turns out he was right. So yeah,
that's pretty wild, because I think he's told a story that he got his start by like driving around tennis players he was working for the U.S. Open. So I guess tennis was in the family genes dating back centuries ago.
I don't know about the centuries, but yeah, I've been around tennis a hell of a long time. And obviously, if you guys did any research, you know that I grew up a couple of blocks away from John McEnroe, who we're in the NBC booth together calling the French Open even now. We worked across a bunch of networks together. So yeah, I have to credit him, I think, for my tennis history, because when you're 10 years old and you're watching an 8-year-old do the things that John could do, Yeah, that kind of stays with you. And when he broke through at age 18 at Wimbledon as a qualifier, got himself all the way to the semis, I was the only one there who'd ever heard of this kid, you know? So the British press were coming to me and asking me about, and I mean, the way he played stylistically and his incredibly soft hands. And I'm just saying to them, okay, yes, yeah, he's impressive, but he was doing all that stuff about 2 feet ago. So that was really impressive. And John always played like that.
So obviously in 1977, I guess it was a dream come true for the two of you to win the mixed doubles together at the French Open. And during that tournament, and I guess, you know, going back to John as a kid, was he always as explosive and sometimes, you know, letting the referees know what's up?
Yeah, interestingly, Nick and Joe, I've been asked that, and my memory of it is that John didn't do that at all. First of all, he was almost always either 1 or 2 in the country in his age group. And you got to remember that back in the 70s, when we were playing junior tennis, we didn't have chair umpires. You know,
Right.
we didn't have, you'd sign up for the tournament and then you go up to the front desk and they'd hand you a can of balls, you know? So there was no one to bark at. there was no, and John there was no reason for him to complain. There was no one to complain to. There was no one in the stand. He wasn't telling people to sit down and shut up. You know, he wasn't telling a lines person, you know, they were blind. There were no lines people. There were no fans. So that kind of all happened in his debut in 1977 at Wimbledon when people really reacted to him. And I think he was as surprised as anybody that it got such a big reaction, you know, that he would kick his racket around and question calls and all that stuff.
So at the top, I alluded to, you finished, well, you performed well in several tournaments, but you never really reached a high mark in your career. You finished, I think.
I wasn't that good, Joe. I'm the first to agree with you.
Oh, it was the knee injuries that forced the retirement. Right. Don't sell yourself short.
I was riding on rims from the time I was in high school. So I knew that my time was very short. I was lucky. I would never have been able to play professional tennis with my level of skill now in the 2000s. But back in the 70s, you know, I was a lefty. I had a little serve and volley game. I kind of got away with it for a couple of years, and it would happen to be a great time to be an American tennis player in the 70s, because that was the time of Billie Jean King and Jimmy Connors and McEnroe and Arthur Ashe and Chris Evert and Martina Navratilova. I mean, it was that little window I had. I still look back on it and wonder if American tennis will ever be as good as it was back then. Yes, and it was a big deal. I mean, what's that? It was great, right?
I was saying it's an exceptional time period.
Yeah.
My dad used to love tennis when he was younger. You know, unfortunately, he's not as athletic as he once was, but he was a really, really huge fan of John McEnroe, and he had the opportunity to meet him a couple of times.
Yeah, I mean, John was, and the thing is, there are certain players, I mean, I've been at this about 40 years now. There are players over the years who just spike the ratings. They walk out on the court and the ratings bounce. And I would include in that John McEnroe, Jimmy Connors, Andre Agassi. Even at a time when Pete Sampras was the world's #1, people walk on the court and the ratings stayed pretty flat. Andre, boom, spiked them. You know, there are just some players that do that for you. Serena Williams. We would go, and I've covered a lot. I've obviously been around for her whole career, but we would cover her doubles matches on Tennis Channel. We would leave a pretty decent singles match because Venus and Serena were playing a doubles match. I mean, that's how important she has been to the tennis world and to selfishly our ratings.
Yeah, I think tennis has become very personality driven.
Yes.
It's the same. You see it in golf as well, where just because someone's the best doesn't necessarily mean that that's who this is going to be marketed as the star. And you see the same thing in Major League Baseball as well with Mike Trout. He's not like the flashiest guy. Everyone knows he's the greatest, but things aren't marketed around him. And, you know, you have the Williams sister come in, and they're just incredible talents. You've never seen 2 sisters come in before, and they really changed the way that tennis matches are broadcasted from beginning to end, and no doubt about it. And you've been, working on broadcasting in tennis since 1980 when you joined USA Network. You shortly after the next year joined PBS and MSG. How did those opportunities come about for you so early on in your, post-retirement career there from playing?
Well, 1980 was the last time I played a match. I lost very quickly, first round of Wimbledon. I had too many flat tires to keep trying to bump up with my knees. But months earlier at the year-end championships for the women, I did pickup commentary, and a guy named Mark Stolberger, who was working for USA Network, happened to hear me. And he called me a couple of weeks after Wimbledon 1980 and said, "Hey, USA Network's going to start covering women's tennis. Do you want to, are you around? Are you available?" I was madly available. I mean, I needed another knee surgery, but yeah, sure. I'll talk. I've been talking for, weeks. So I just started USA doing women's tennis, which wasn't a real career. There wasn't a lot of women's tennis. It was only when I started covering men's tennis that I actually got to pay down my mortgage. And then I started covering other sports as well. And then it became something I could do on a pretty regular basis. But that's how it started. I was just lucky that this guy happened to hear me at Madison Square Garden late at night, because they couldn't find anybody. There were no more. All the other celebrities had gone. All the other tennis. I was the only one hanging around for this match between Yvonne Goolagong and Tracy Austin. And I got to tell you, I had a couple of pops, and I was nice and loose. This guy interviewed me before that match and said, "Why are you hanging around?" So, it's going to be a great match. And I started describing the difference between Goolagong's style and Tracy Austin's style. And he decided, he talked to his producer and said, why don't we let her call this match with us? I didn't even have a headset, guys. Wow. They just put one of those like Larry King microphones in front of me. So I was nice and loose and relaxed, and I knew my onions, so I just started talking. And it was very lucky that a producer heard me that night.
It's great. Right place, right time.
Exactly.
Sometimes it just works out that way. Now, you mentioned, obviously, Madison Square Garden, the world's most famous arena. And,
you've done time there.
I've done time there, yes. So absolutely. I have former intern there, which is awesome. But you don't really see too many big time, sometimes you see the celebrity matches, but you don't see too much tennis there anymore. And I always wondered why. What do you think about, the arena as a whole? Obviously, it's the world's most famous, but how do you see any scenario where in the coming years here we start to see some more events there, not just tennis, but more things outside of the traditional basketball, hockey, and wrestling?
Well, you're right. The year-end championships for the men and the women used to be held at the Garden, and reporters and TV people loved it because and it was around Christmas time, so it was kind of great. It was beautiful. But what happened, obviously, to rent out Madison Square Garden is a tricky thing when they've got other stuff going on, and other countries wanted the year-end championships. So then it became like it's the men's championships for the last 8 years has been in London, and now next year it's going to be in Italy. And the women's championships have been in Asia because the WTA, the Women's Tennis Association, is trying to grow that market. And it got canceled this year. A lot of stuff got canceled in my sport in 2020. But you're right. The Garden, I'm from Douglas in Queens, and I used to take the Long Island Railroad from D-Town right into Penn Station, and Madison Square Garden was right up ahead of it. And I used to go to the Knicks games. I watched hockey. The first ever concert I went to was Stevie Wonder when I was 15 years old. Madison Square Garden to me is just one of the great. There are some arenas that are truly special, like in an epic way, because you can kind of feel the history of the joint when you walk in, and that's certainly true with the Rangers and the Knicks and all this boxing. So many amazing, boxing titles have been decided there as well. So I don't see that it's coming back, frankly. I don't, again, so many countries want that year-end championship, and they throw a lot of dough to make it happen.
It's all about the money, but it is the mecca of entertainment. That's for sure. But with options Soon we'll see out in Belmont, the Islanders' new stadium, and of course the Barclays Center, Prudential Center, all in the metropolitan area. It's cheaper for companies to rent them out as opposed to Madison Square Garden. But
I haven't been to the Barclays Center yet. How is it there?
It's not good for hockey, which is why they're leaving. The Islanders are leaving, but it's pretty nice.
A great facility.
It's a
great facility for concerts and basketball games.
Yeah.
Not really a building suited for hockey.
Got it.
Yes.
All right. That's too bad.
So you're doing your broadcasting, then you join ESPN. You have 2 stints with them. You also do U.S. Open coverage for CBS for many years, up till 2014. You're doing HBO, as you mentioned before, Turner, as rights deals switch and change. Then in May 2003, you join NBC Sports, and you really haven't looked back. You joined there. You're doing tennis, of course. When you signed up for that gig, did you know you'd be doing Olympics, or do you going in there just thinking, I'm doing tennis? And how did that opportunity come about?
No, I had no idea. Absolutely no idea. But I'm one of those people who raises my hand. Yeah, I'll do it. I'm around. A man in charge of NBC Sports at the time, Dick Ebersol, gave me every opportunity. And the only reason I got to call tennis, it was my first French Open, and Chris Evert had been their announcer, and she was pregnant. So yes, Chrissy's having a baby, and and what happened was that I just continued to have opportunities like that. I started covering. I had actually done 3 Olympics for CBS. Because they used to have the rights to it. And when NBC got the rights and I got a chance to cover them, this Tokyo 2020 would have been my 15th Olympics. And I'm hoping that it happens in 2021. And NBC seems to think it will happen. So we'll see. But no, I had no idea at all that something like that could come my way. But what was nice was that I think the first Olympic assignment I got was for skiing for NBC. And all I was the reporter at the bottom of the slopes. But I went into this total ski mode. And the great thing for me, guys, is I travel the world, covering tennis, playing tennis, but I had never been to the French Alps to cover an event or, Cortina d'Ampezzo. All of a sudden I'm in these gorgeous cities that tennis would never have taken me to. So that became a real blessing. And then I got to tell stories. That's the kind of, I do a lot of features for the Olympics, and then you get to understand the history and the culture of the cities you're in. And it's a great planet. I mean, I honestly say yes to a lot of things just because I want to see what's going on around this world.
Yeah. And every night, tuning in, obviously, for years with Bob Costas and now Mike Tirico, always look forward to your stories. So I'm just wondering, typically, how far in advance are you going out to these places to film these things? And also, were plans already made for you to go in 2020 to start filming, and then everything had to be halted?
I'd already shot 3 features for 2020. We shoot a year out because we want the season to be the same.
Right.
So like for Sochi, I spent 10 days in Siberia. And then, by the way, we go to Sochi and it's balmy there. There were people swimming in the Black Sea. It was a bizarre Olympics, not one of my favorites. And that was the famous Bob Costas pink eye situation, which also got very humorous, and Bob was good spirited about it all. But yeah, we usually shoot a year out. So I had already done for this summer's games, I had been there. We scheduled this one around cherry blossom time. And so that's why we decided to go shoot, because we wanted to show people how gorgeous Japan is during cherry blossom season, which is short. And then I also learned how to become a sumo wrestler, which I'm proficient at now. And we did a salute to samurai swords. So we went way out into the country where there's generations, hundreds of years of samurai sword makers are still at their craft. So yeah, it's usually a year out. And I think one of them did run on one of the NBC platforms this summer. But yeah, it's hard to know what's going to happen in 2021. I mean, the idea of 15,000 people coming into a country that is still spiking with COVID. It's interesting, guys, because the Australian Open tennis championships is coming up in Japan. I mean, in Melbourne. It's usually held in like midway through January. It's been pushed back to February, and it would mean 1,000 people are coming in from other countries to play that event in terms of players and coaches, physios, trainers, all that stuff. And the reason Australia has still not officially committed to holding the event is not because COVID is a problem there. It's because COVID isn't a problem there. They've been able to fight it back. So the government of Australia, and especially the state of Victoria, which is where Melbourne, where the tournament is held, they've got a lot of hesitations, understandably, and reservations about letting all these foreigners come in. Crazy,
It's
huh?
going to be interesting moving forward to see how these international events and I guess the actions these countries take in order to acclimate the rest of the world and be able to hold these events safely.
But Joe, don't you think hockey did a pretty good job this season? I mean, I think
they did a tremendous job. I think under the circumstances at the time, in order for them to have put together a coherent plan in place so quickly, using the 2 hub cities that they did in Canada, obviously everybody was essentially airlifted from their homes. A lot of people, not only just teams, coaches, players, but broadcasters, production crews, they spent quite a few months away from their families.
Yes.
Probably we weren't at the height of this at that time. We were coming off of the height and going into the summer. But I think the NHL did an outstanding job. Nick and I have had Liam McHugh on recently.
I watched it.
On recently.
I did my homework.
Yeah.
It was great. You guys have a very nice podcast going on, and Liam's a good guy.
Wow.
Yeah, we love.
I'm not surprised. You're an award-winning journalist.
We love the NBC sports family, and we had Pierre McGuire, your colleague, and so I just love the Olympics, seeing these amazing broadcasters doing sports that they typically don't do. Pierre does a great job of water polo. So did Doc Emmerich. Kenny Albert is like the most versatile guy in the business.
He really is.
Sport, track. You got Al Trotwig doing. He does gymnastics. It's just an amazing team there, and I just love that the powers that be over there give you all the faith in the world to say, hey, you may not know this sport, but go ahead, and we have full faith in you to go cover that sport.
Well, guys, if you ever get the chance to work at an Olympics for NBC, you'll see. I mean, I'm only fluent in one sport. I'm the first one to admit it, but the week before the Olympic Games, we all go into, we spend a day long, various speakers coming up, explaining to us the right way to do an interview. And here's some examples of a great moment, on the field or at the bottom of a hill, the wrong way, you're praying as you're sitting there. Oh God, don't use me as one of the don'ts, please. Like, they teach you how to, not to second guess, but to sort of pre-guess, to let people know, where do you take your eyes? Where do you want people to look? What do you need people to know? I mean, that's one of the tricks I feel when I jump from sport to sport. I have these amazing analysts. I've had it in figure skating and skiing and everything else. They acquire this great technique of not telling you everything they know, just telling you everything you need to know to enjoy that moment, and not bury you under stats or let people enjoy it, I mean, that's what I like about my sport. It's a game of pauses. So more often than not, a huge thing happens, and all you just sit back and let your director cut cameras, Yeah.
The last few minutes of conversation have led us to this point, right? We're finally going to get the opportunity to ask you about your epic badminton rant, because it is quite possibly one of the most outrageous, one of the most random, one of the most off-the-cuff sports rants I think that exists out there. I remember when it happened, and I know for a fact that a lot of people are probably believing that that was not okay and that was just something that you completely went off the rails with on your own. It's one of the most, like I said, one of the greatest rants in history. How
Just
did it
like
come
your
about?
cousin, Mike Francesa. You just let it go.
I have to tell you, that was not in a teleprompter, as you can imagine. And everything I described was absolutely true. I was about to throw, I was the host of the daytime show in Athens. And you know, I had to throw to, you know, all kinds of different events. And one of them was badminton. And I had told my producer, I want to show the difference between, you know, a Kmart badminton racket and shuttlecock and what the pros use. And so it was supposed to just go there. And then I would say, coming up, here comes badminton. And there was a little bit of time where I took time. I'm not sure which anymore, but it devolved into me explaining my career as a mother, you know, having kids play badminton in your driveway and what happens. And yes, it seems every Summer Olympics, it's not really a badminton rant. It's a motherhood rant.
Right.
If you've ever had children, you know what it's like. And my house happened to, for some reason, it attracted a lot of small children when I had them myself. And yeah,
Great
that
that
was
you
a
had the
fun.
props
I
on
have to
hand,
tell you
too.
what happened though, Joe. When it was over, I say, coming up, badminton, and now we're in a commercial, and my poor, long-suffering producer came out of his booth and came up to the desk, and he just like looked at me and said, "What the hell was that?" They gave me a lot of freedom back in the day. I'm not sure you could take up that kind of time anymore on network television.
Live TV, folks. Live
That was
TV.
incredible. Yeah. My wife and I, we love playing badminton. We're already good. We just play in her parents' driveway when we go
It's
to
awesome.
visit. But it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. And now we got they have big oversized ones as well, which is kind of cheating, but all fun no matter what. And who knows, maybe that'll be an Olympic sport one day as well. We keep getting all these new sports, and I'm really happy we're going to see baseball and softball back in 2021, which will be awesome. I think the new logo, the 2021 games, is just marketing genius, where they add the one after the zero. So I think that's incredible. Shout out to my wife who works in marketing for NBC.
Oh, very good.
She didn't have anything to do with that, but I did want to give her a shout out there. But another famous thing from your Olympic coverage is your famous comment about men's double luge, and you said like a bar bet gone wrong. It was voted like the line of the year. When you said that, did you think that it would go, if it was these days, viral, but just travel around the way it did then?
Right. Have you guys seen what that looks like when two guys are on top of each other sliding down a mountain feet first? I mean, clearly a lot of winter sports were invented in bars. That's all I could figure. It's freezing cold. They're all hanging around. They've blown the suds off a lot of beer, and they say, "Hey, I've got a great idea. Let's see who's the fastest down the mountain. Let's take this hors d'oeuvre tray and slide down it and see who wins." I mean, that's, to me, that was in Salt Lake. And as it happened, I had done a little bit of coverage of bobsled and luge. They had sent me out just to get used to the sport and to the announcers, so I knew like what on earth I might be doing. But I didn't think it was that big a gig, honestly, because most of those sports are won by Germans and Austrians and Alpine countries. And as it turned out, 8 American medals came off of that mountain. So I was just lucky I got to, and they spoke English, and the guys were happy to be on the air, and I ended up having a great couple of weeks in Salt Lake. I would cover double luge again in a heartbeat.
One of the most crazy things that's a sport in the Olympics in the winter that I can't believe was ever a sport is skiers who shoot guns. I think that is the most incredible sport, because I don't know how do you train for that? You go to the gun range, you're skiing. I don't know where they originated from, but you can't keep your eye off it when it's on TV.
It's absolutely true. And it's, let's face it, the Olympics started out as war games, without death back in ancient Greece. wars around the world were suspended for months. So a lot of war games, boxing, wrestling, sprint, the marathon obviously came out of ancient Greece as well. And then winter sports happened. And as I said, I got to assume that a lot of these sports, it's a freezing cold night, you're not ready to go home to the missus and you just sort of invent stuff. But that's a classic war game. Honestly, skiing as hard as you can, slowing down your breathing, aiming for your targets. It's really, the more you watch it, there's something hypnotic about it. It's true. Because then you realize how much stress, how much effort they've put into getting to the target. And then they've got to take everything down and squeeze the trigger. Yeah, there's some amazing, they're among for me, the most impressive athletes are those guys.
Yeah. We had a lot of laughs here in a very short amount of time. But I want to ask one more serious thing before we start to let you go. You're an inspiration, I think, to a lot of women out there, not just female athletes, but a lot of women who are looking to break into this industry. It was a hard industry to break into. Now, not so much anymore. But like I said, you are an inspiration to a lot of women out there. You've met probably a tremendous amount of great people in your life. Obviously, you mentioned Dick Ebersol before. He's a name that always comes up on this podcast.
Yep.
Who do you think, we'll say outside of Mr. Ebersol, who do you think is either one person or a few people who have been the biggest inspirations in your life and have helped you reach the point where you are now, which I think is a very, very successful award-winning career?
Well, thank you for that, Joe. And I would put Ross Greenberg in that conversation as well. The man who for so many years ran HBO Sports. He at Wimbledon, it was my first ever Wimbledon for HBO. And at the end of it, Ross said to me, we've got this new show called Real Sports with Brian Gumbel. Do you want to maybe do a story or two? And of course, my hand goes, yeah, sure. And they gave me Charles Barkley. That was my first ever profile. I mean, even I couldn't screw that up. I mean, the guy, it was a joy. This is when he was still playing for the Sixers. The Phoenix Suns, I should say. And then it just kept happening. Like you mentioned the Dare to Compete, the history of women in sports. Again, I credit Billie Jean King. She and Donna De Verona, a couple of women, were the consultants for the history of women in sports documentary that HBO was doing. And once again, Billie said, hey, Mary's got a lot of ideas. Why don't we bring her in? So I was originally brought into that room as a consultant. And then, of course, I start spitballing ideas. Who we have to, and what about the first woman to, and I start coming up. And again, Ross Greenberg said, well, do you want to do some of these interviews? Absolutely. I say yes a lot, guy. Yeah. By the end of all of that, I had been so consumed by it and I so enjoyed it. And I was learning about long form storytelling. By the end of it, it turned out that Frank DeFord did the first half of the history of women in sports. He wrote the first half and I wrote the second half. And after that, I was hooked on documentaries. And you guys know how much, there's so much content that's necessary on so many platforms now. I mean, documentaries are springing up everywhere. But that was my first ever work in a documentary. And believe me, it wasn't because of me that the thing won a Peabody, but what a team I was on. What an experience that was. And then you just kind of feel like, yeah, let's keep doing this. This is a good thing. And the Billie Jean King thing was an absolute, that was, it was something Margaret Grossi, the producer, and I, we were very passionate about it for a long time. And that got to happen. So I've been blessed, to say the very least.
And we have been blessed to have you on, and we appreciate that you said yes to us.
Absolutely. I think you guys, I love what you're doing. Keep it going. If you ever need someone to talk again, you got my number.
Really appreciate that. Obviously, you do your homework very, very well. We always give our guests the last words, right? And you've kind of given us a lot of really great stuff here towards the end. But if there's anything else you would like to share with our listeners, if there's anything you would like to promote, the floor is all yours. Once again, we thank you for coming on our show. This was a real lot of fun, and we didn't anticipate this many laughs. Some chest pains.
Mary, I gotta say, your Mike Francesa impersonation was probably the best I've ever heard.
Oh boy. Well, no, all I would say is social distance, wear your masks. I'm working on a story right now for Real Sports about something called long haulers. What happens after you've contracted COVID, and then what happens if you're an athlete, if you're anyone, but I'm concentrating on athletes, and how for some athletes, it's very hard to get back to where you were. It affects your heart, it affects your lungs. It can make, so that's all I'm saying. I looked on on a list of where I land on, when I get the COVID vaccine. It's a long time from now. So in the meantime, I'm gonna take every precaution, and I certainly hope you guys do as well.
Absolutely. Let's hope everybody stays safe, and let's hope we see the Olympic Games in 2021. It'll be a very busy back-to-back years for you, because you'll be right on to Winter Olympics and getting those amazing features done. We can only hope. Really appreciate it, Mary. Thank you so much. So for our very special guest, Mary Carillo, and for my co-host, Joe Calabrese, this has been I'm Right.